On whose life was the movie Boyz in the Hood based on? What did the director do to ensure the realism of the film? Ice Cube was convinced to play Doughboy, so what other famous musicians did the director want to get to play the members of Doughboy's crew? These and more questions will be answered on
Back Look Cinema, the podcast.
Yo, cuz, I know why you didn't get out of the car last night. Shouldn't been there in the first place. You don't want that shit to come back to haunt you. I ain't been up this early in a long time. Turned on the TV this morning. Had this shit on about living in a violent world. Showed all these foreign places, foreigners living and all. I started thinking, man, either they don't know, don't show, or don't care about what's going on in the hood. Man, all this foreign shit. And they ain't have shit on my brother, man. I ain't got no brother. Got no mother neither. She loved that fool more than she loved me. Welcome back, friends. My name is Zoe. It's spelled Z-O or Z to the O for those of you outside of the U.S. This is the 215th episode of Back Look Cinema, the podcast, where we take a look back at the movies of yesteryear, especially the movies of the latter half of the last millennium. If you like what you're about to hear, then please tell your family, tell your friends, and tell the doughboys and gang members and thugs about Back Look Cinema. I remember seeing this film in theaters. I remember feeling that it was important and specifically relevant to my life. I didn't grow up in the most dangerous neighborhood, but in some small ways I could relate to the goings-on in the crime-ridden South Central neighborhoods depicted in Boyz in the Hood. In a Golden Globes article written by Eliza Leonelli, John Singleton talks about how he based the movie on his own life, moving from his mother's house to his father's, basing the character of Furious Styles on his own father. In fact, many of the characters in the film were based on people he knew. And having Furious Styles be the anchor for the film. Singleton credited his parents' teaching in keeping him away from the lure of drugs. Ultimately, John Singleton is telling a story of how he got out of the hood and became a productive member of society. It's about how he avoided the easy money of drugs and why he didn't need to join a gang because of the support structure that his parents provided. We also see that following the straight and narrow doesn't guarantee that you'll get out of the hood, but it's the best chance for a favorable outcome. And now, let's check out this impactful film in the opening credits. Boyz in the Hood, 1991. Trey Styles was a brilliant young boy with anger issues. After getting into yet another fight at his elementary school, his mom takes him to live with his strict, no-nonsense father in the dangerous Crenshaw neighborhood of South Central Los Angeles. Trey must navigate a city filled with gangs, drugs, casual violence, and brutal police officers. As a young man about to graduate high school, he continued to follow his father's advice while at the same time witnessing the brutal reality of the real world. Boyz in the Hood was released July 12, 1991, produced by Columbia Pictures. It grossed over $57 million in the U.S. and Canada, on a reported budget of $6.9 million. And in terms of investment, this was 1991's most financially successful movie. If we adjusted these totals for inflation, then that would mean the total gross, had it been made today, would have been $136 million, and the budget would have been $15 million. That's an incredible success story for this movie that some people, well, specifically Ice Cube, did not think that anyone would want to see this movie. He was thinking, because he lived this life. He lived in South Central Los Angeles. He had to deal with drugs and gangs. And to him, it was just regular life. It was uninteresting. Who would want to watch a movie about this regular style of upbringing? But as it turns out, John Singleton also grew up in this situation. And he understood that there was a story there. And he wrote this story and directed this story. And it became a phenomenon. This phenomenon was starring Laurence Fishburne. He played Jason Furious Styles. And you may have seen his other works. For example, he's been in The Matrix and that series, John Wick and that series, acclaimed films like Aquila and the Bee and Hoodlum. Actually, I don't know if Hoodlum is acclaimed or not, but I see it everywhere. So it must have some value. I haven't seen it, and I always tell myself I should check it out. Also starring Ice Cube as Doughboy, whose government name is Darren. You may have seen Ice Cube in Anaconda from 1997, and I think he's in the remake too, but I'm not sure if he's a full character or if it's like a cameo role, because it's yet another movie I hadn't seen. He's also been in Three Kings, Friday, which is phenomenal, and Barbershop, which is nearly as good. Cuba Gooding Jr. plays Trey Styles. You might have seen him in Jerry Maguire. We covered that in episode 120, and we did that with Dan from Goodwill Podcasting. He's also been in Radio, Outbreak, and Pearl Harbor. And I always like to tell my Cuba Gooding Jr. Pearl Harbor story. I used to live in Hawaii, and while they were filming that movie in Hawaii, Cuba Gooding Jr. happened to be staying in a hotel that I was working at. I was a security guard at the Halekulani Hotel, and that's where I met him. And he came in at, I don't know, I was working overnight, so it was like 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. He came in off the beach with his bodyguard, and he happened to introduce himself to me, I guess because I was the only guy there. He was a little tipsy. But it was great. I was starstruck. It was great to meet him. Also, there's Nia Long. She played Brandy. You might have seen her in a plethora of movies. She's in all the movies, including Soul Food, which we just covered in episode 213. Love Jones, The Best Man, and a movie called Keanu. I think it's both Key and Peele in that movie. Strange guys. But anyway, it's like Nia Long seems to be in all of the classic black movies. Morris Chestnut played Ricky Baker, and you might have seen him in The Inkwell, G.I. Jane, or The Game Plan. Tyra Farrow plays Brenda Baker, and she's been in White Men Can't Jump, Poetic Justice, and The Exorcist, and a bunch of other things. Angela Bassett plays Reva Devereaux, and you might have seen her in some other movies like Strange Days, and we covered that in episode 179. Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, where I think that she gave one of her best performances, and Contact. And I also want to have a shout out to some of the younger actors that were in this movie. They played the younger versions of the characters that we meet, and we actually meet them first. So there's Desi A. Hines, or Desi Arnaz Hines II, which I guess means somebody really liked Desi Arnaz. And he plays Trey Styles at age 10. And you might have seen him in Harlem Nights. We covered that in episode 76. Or House Party that we just talked about in episode 214. There's Baja Jackson, who played Doughboy at age 10. And you might have seen him in Poetic Justice or Three Ninjas. There's Donovan McCrary, who played Ricky at age 10. This was his only theatrical appearance. And then there's Kenneth A. Brown, who played Little Chris. And you might have seen him in Candyman or Punks. And I think that's pretty much the only movies that he's been in. This movie was written and directed by John Singleton. And he has written and directed many of his movies, including Poetic Justice, Higher Learning, Rosewood, Shaft, and Baby Boy. And I have to admit that Shaft was, from my understanding, a lot of that movie was changed. There was a lot of script rewrites for that movie, and that's kind of a shame because I feel like Shaft had so much potential. And I forgot to mention, the Shaft I'm talking about was the Shaft that Samuel L. Jackson starred in. I think it was either the late 90s or the early 2000s. I'm pretty sure it was the late 90s. But yeah, that was the Samuel L. Jackson one, not the original Shaft or the Shaft that came out like in the 2020s. At any rate, it was almost good. It was close. It was so close to being good. And Rosewood, maybe I should rewatch that movie, but I remember when I first watched it, I hated it. Also, he directed Too Fast, Too Furious, but he only directed that movie. He didn't write it. All the other movies he had a hand in writing in. The composer for the score for this movie is Stanley Clarke, and you might have heard some of his music in Romeo Must Die, Passenger 57, Undisputed, First Sunday, Soul Men, The Transporter, or What's Love Got to Do with It, which to this day, I wish I had seen it when it had came out, but it's not too late to watch it. And I also want to talk about the soundtrack because the soundtrack for the movies that came out in the 90s, they were clutch. What was interesting about the soundtrack specifically is that it was mostly diegetic, meaning that the characters were listening to this music. They was either listening to the radio in the car or they had a boom box. Somebody had a radio in their house. It was almost always diegetic to set the mood for whatever the characters was feeling at that moment. And some notable songs that were in this movie were Jam on It by New Clues, More Bounce It Outs, that was written by Roger Troutman and performed by Zapp. I always think of them as Roger and Zapp. Sucker MCs by Run DMC, Ooh Child, sung by the Five Stair Steps, Work It Out by Money Love, Me and You by Tony, and How to Survive in South Central by Ice Cube. I think they play that song at the end of the movie, though, like during the credits. And that is specifically non-diegetic because there are no characters there to listen to it. It's in the credits. And it seemed to me that it seemed like when you think about rappers making music for the movie, you tend to think about Will Smith. But this is one of the rare times that Ice Cube had made one specifically for a movie that he starred in. This is his first movie. So if you're a rapper and they get you in the movie, they get you with the song. It seems like the thing to do. So that's it for the credits. And I have a couple of announcements. First, I want to acknowledge at Mark Crespo -M2C. He left a message on the YouTube account and he wrote, "Love this film growing up. Awesome episode," with a heart or a heart emoji. Thank you very much, Mark Crespo M2C. Really appreciate that. If you have any more comments, if any of you have a comment, and if I have time, I will read them on the podcast. I really appreciate you checking out the show. Later this month, I'll be a guest on Movie Lovers Unite, that podcast, and we'll be talking about Edward Scissorhands, and I had never seen that movie, and I'm excited to check that movie out and to talk about it on that podcast. That'll be later on this month, so in a couple of weeks, so that episode probably won't be out until April. I'll keep you up to date as to when exactly the episode comes out. Also, I'll be recording an episode with the creator of Saturday Morning Podcast. His name is Chris. And we're going to talk about his favorite movie, Star Trek V. I had covered many of the Star Trek movies on this podcast, specifically 2, 3, and 4. And I actually real skeptical about doing Star Trek V because I hadn't liked it when I first saw it. And I think I only watched it the one time, but I've been convinced that I need to check it out again, and maybe it'll change my mind about how I feel about it. And then after that, I'm definitely going to cover Star Trek VI because that is one of the best Star Trek movies. So that'll be later on this month, and I'll let you know when that episode comes out, probably in April. And that's it for the announcements. And now we're going to talk about our favorite parts. As always, when we talk about our favorite parts, I try to dig into the themes of the movie. And the themes of this particular movie, it feels like it's about family, friendship, and loyalty. And there's real emphasis on family and the importance of parents actively raising and supporting and guiding their kids, not just having kids, not just like your only relationship with your child is disciplining your child or yelling and screaming at a child. It's like actively having a role in your kid's life, shaping them, encouraging them, guiding them, like actually being there and nourishing them, being there to build them up and not being like I don't know. It's because some parents are terrible, so I don't know how to describe it. Just being a bad parent. I feel like even though it's like a coming of age story for Trey, I also feel like it is a parental guide of sorts, like how to be a good parent versus how to be a bad parent. And you see the parallels in this movie. Along with the themes of this movie, there are messages, and they're very overt messages. Like they're not even, or at least John Singleton is not even trying to be subtle about his messaging. If it's subtle, it's barely subtle. So there's a lot of symbolism. There's callbacks to other films. He throws a lot in his first movie. This is his directorial debut, and I feel like he puts his heart into it. So one of the first overt messages that you get is there are, like, just in the opening credits, there are sounds of violence. There's sirens, there are helicopters, and there's like a helicopter blades. Like you hear this throughout pretty much the whole movie. And that's the police helicopters looking for suspects or whatever. So you hear the sirens, the helicopter, people yelling, gunshots, there's screaming. You feel the general malaise of fear and distress. And then as the scene opens up and the sound, the general noise continues, you see you're on the street. On the street, there's a stop sign, and then the camera slowly zooms in on the stop sign. And then you get the message right there. It's like very overt, stop the violence. That was the message that he was sending. And that was a general message that kids got growing up in the 90s. There was a lot of say no to drugs, stop the violence in general, right? We gotta, and that messaging continues in this movie. Is like we gotta stop fighting each other. We gotta support each other as, or support other Black people, that sort of thing. And that's like I said, that's a constant message that is reinforced in this film. Like, because if we support each other as Black people, then like as the message goes, then we can help each other be successful instead of, falling for the okie doke, so to speak. There's also another kind of overt message. There are, as some of the characters walk by in the environment, they're outside. It's a sunny day. And in the environment, there's a series of Ronald Reagan posters, like an old, like black and white poster of Ronald Reagan with a cowboy hat on. And they're not giant posters. They're like notebook size, or maybe slightly larger than notebook size posters. And there's a series of this same picture plastered on some of the walls and telephone poles. And this little section that the boys are walking through. And these posters are shot up. Somebody had been shooting. I don't know if these were shot on purpose or they were just stray shots with gangs shooting at each other. But many of these posters are full of bullet holes. And one of the posters that the camera kind of centers on is a poster with the bullet hole is right in the middle of Ronald Reagan's forehead. So make that as you will. I think that is kind of a message that suggests that Ronald Reagan is to thank for the situation that many people find themselves in now. And they kind of reinforce that message. And there's a speech by Furious Styles, and he talks more about that. He has a famous gentrification speech. So when I was describing this film earlier, I was talking about how Trey was basically a brilliant child who had anger issues. So Trey was one of those kids that he's one of those kids that are kind of advanced for his class. So if he gets bored, he's paying less attention. He's almost fooling around. I don't think that he has like attention deficit disorder, but he definitely has attention problems. So when the teacher noticed that he's not engaged in the class, she like basically has a back and forth with him, and he says, "Oh, I could teach this class. I could be a teacher." And then the teacher says, "Come on, you let's go and teach the class then." And so he gets up and he actually starts to teach the class. He teaching the class about something that his father taught him, about how the oldest human bones are found in Africa, so that all people come from Africa. But he doesn't really expound upon it, and I don't think that he has all of the details about basically how human civilization had started in Africa and how it expanded to Africa, to other parts of the world. But one of the kids is like offended by this. It's like, I ain't from Africa. I'm from, and then he named some place in South Central California. He's like, I'm from there. I'm from that street. You're like, you the African booty scratcher. And because Trey was called an African booty scratcher, that was a grave insult. And then he gets in a fight in school. And what's interesting is that growing up, I remember that was a grave insult, especially with little kids. We used to call each other African booty scratcher. And that was as close to the N-word as you can get when you were like 12. So that was, it was almost like as African Americans, we would separate ourselves from Africans, or like anybody who was living in someplace like Nigeria or South Africa or Egypt or Lebanon, or we wanted to be, we did not want to be associated with people who lived in Africa. It's like we strongly identify with being American. So if somebody accused you of being African, that was an insult. And somebody called you an African booty scratcher. That was the worst insult. And so a lot of it was propaganda from American media showing us basically what they showed us of how African civilization was. They showed us all the worst parts. So we would get the impression that everybody in Africa lived like the worst people in Africa. They didn't show us like the cities and the buildings and the nice houses and the nice hotels. They only showed us like the worst part of Africa. And we would see commercials where there was there were charities that would ask for money so they can feed kids from Africa and stuff like that. So we just got the impression that everybody in Africa lived like that. I remember one of the biggest ones was Ethiopia. So there was, I guess at the time there was a famine going on in Ethiopia. And so the charity would encourage us to send money to Ethiopia so that kids could eat. Or a lot of times when you're growing up, they would say, eat your food. There are people starving in China, or there are people starving in Africa. So because people are starving in Africa, we're supposed to eat our food. I guess the suggestion is that it could have been you. You could have easily been born in Africa and you could be starving now, but you're not in Africa. You're in America. You're in a land of abundance, and you need to appreciate that abundance. So when you are given something to eat, you should eat it. Do not take this bounty for granted. So that was how a lot of us were raised. I don't know if anybody is saying that anymore. I don't know if anybody. I certainly don't see. I can't speak for everybody, but I haven't seen any charity commercials about feeding kids in Africa. I haven't seen that in a long time. I haven't seen that since I was growing up, or any place for that matter. I used to see commercials about adopting children, but I don't. And it's not a real adoption. It's more like virtual adoption. It's kind of like the same thing where you send money to a charity and they make sure that that money goes to a child that you're sponsoring, quote unquote, so that the child has food and an education. I don't know if it was a scam or not. Talking about it now feels like a scam. But anyway, I'm getting way off track to trying to explain African booty scratcher, which I'm sure nobody says anymore. So he gets in this fight, and then his mother is upset with him getting into a fight because she talked to him about getting into fights. And so they talk about him going to live with his father. It was an agreement that they had that if he got into another fight, he would go and stay with his father. So Trey's mother, Reva Devereaux, she's going to take him to live with his father. And this seems like a worse neighborhood than what he was growing up in. So, in one way, because his father lives in such a dangerous area, because where she lives at, there aren't like police sirens and helicopters flying over all the time. It's like I'm not convinced that there's a bunch of violence where she lives at. It's like not a constant barrage of gunfire or gangs or drugs. But where his father lives at, there's all of that. It's the worst neighborhood. And that's where she takes him to live. But she takes him there because Furious Styles, his father, is very strict. Like, he's not going to put up with no mess. He's no nonsense. And he's constantly teaching his son. He's constantly giving his son lessons. He's giving his son constant attention. So, and then he's also making sure that he has plenty of chores. Like Furious is making sure that his son has plenty of chores to do. So this is where he's sent. And because his father is constantly paying attention to him, I feel like this is one of the reasons that he doesn't fall into the situations that a lot of his friends fall into. There's at one point where Reva goes to drop off Trey, and Furious is in the car with Reva. I think he's in the car with Reva, or maybe he's just outside. But anyway, they're talking, and I couldn't help but think, oh yeah, there's Angela Bassett and Laurence Fishburne together there again. Because then, as I watched this moment, I remember that they were in What's Love Got to Do with It together. I was like, that's right. They were in the same movie together. So anyway, the handing off of Trey from mother to father, that was one of my favorite parts because it did have significant emotional weight, and I really appreciated that. What I noticed about this film is that mostly this film are slices of life. They're like, it's almost like a montage of the life that people are living in this area of the world, in this city, in this neighborhood. We see bits and pieces of the things going on, and it's basically a lot of character development. Like, for example, in the very beginning of the film, we see Trey, Doughboy, and Rick, and another friend, Chris, and they're walking on the train tracks, and one of them says, "You want to see a dead body?" So this is obviously an homage to Stand By Me. It's an homage to Stand By Me, and at the same time, it's showing the contrast between kids getting together, finding a body in an urban neighborhood, and kids getting together and finding a body in like the country or whatever, in a less populated area. Also, this happened in Stand By Me. It happened in the past, so in the 1950s, where in this movie, this is something that's what the same situation looks like today. Another slice of life is Trey and Furious are in the house sleeping one night, and there's a sound. Furious wakes up. He suspects that there's somebody breaking into the house, trying to burgle the house. So he quietly starts to load his 6-shooter. And then Furious he gets up and he starts to creep around trying to find the burglar. And at the same time, around the same time, Trey wakes up from his sleep, goes to the bathroom. But the way the film is shot, Furious is creeping around with this gun, almost looks like he might accidentally shoot Trey. And he sees something, takes a couple of shots, and it shocks Trey. But what you realize is that they're like, Trey and Furious are in different parts of the house. And Furious had seen the intruder, and when the intruder went through the door, Furious shot through the door. It's almost like shoot first, ask questions later situation. Is none of that, hey, stop right there or freeze. It's more like, you're already in the house, I'm going to have to shoot you. So, and then after he takes his shot, he chases the assailant or the intruder. Well, he doesn't actually see, he just runs after the intruder. But the intruder's already gone. The intruder got away. And then they have to call the police, and the police show up. And it in the first place, it takes them an hour to get there. And then in the second place, the police have not both the police, just specifically one of the police officers he has like a messed up attitude toward the situation. And basically he says, "It's too bad you didn't kill him," right? And that's not Styles' philosophy. Like, Styles took a shot to defend himself, but he wasn't shooting because not that he wanted to kill somebody, but I think that he felt that he was in a situation where it was himself or somebody else. But, he's not a murderer. He's not hunting people. He's not, it's like, Styles, I think Styles' philosophy was that, we shouldn't be hating each other. That shouldn't be our attitude. And that's what he tries to convey to the police officer who happens to be black. But the police officer is like confused, like it doesn't compute, he doesn't understand. And then the police is like, is there something wrong? And Furious is like, well, yeah, there's something wrong. It's just too bad you don't know what it is. And then other things happen. You see how Doughboy and Rick are being raised. And you see that their mother is abusive towards Doughboy, but more accepting of Rick's. Like, she obviously loves Rick more than she loves Doughboy. Even if it could be said that she loves Doughboy, she's always like hitting on Doughboy and yelling at him and screaming. I can't imagine him feeling any love for his mother or any love in that household, it seems. But I think the idea is to kind of show the contrast between how Furious raises his son and how Doughboy's mother, Brenda, is raising him. I mentioned earlier how the boys went and they looked at a dead body. And after they looked at the dead body, there were some older kids and they was harassing Ricky for Ricky's football. And Doughboy had been telling Ricky to leave the football at home. I told you not to bring it. I told you to leave it at home. Like, even on the way to find the dead body, Doughboy was telling him, if something happened to that ball, I ain't going to help you get it back. But then when these older kids, they asked Ricky for the football. They was like, man, I ain't going to take your football. I ain't going to steal it, man. I could buy a whole bunch of footballs. Just toss me your football. Because they act like they're going to, just toss it back. But then when Ricky throws them the football, it was like, thanks for the football. And then they go and the older kids start playing amongst themselves. And they act like they weren't going to give the football back. So even though Doughboy told Ricky that he wasn't going to get the football back, he got to go get the football. I think part of it is because he loves his brother and he don't want anything bad to happen to him. And I think the other part of it is that if they go home without Ricky's football, then his mom is going to blame him for it. But at the same time, Trey had offered Ricky Trey's football. Like, Trey had a football at home. It's like he said, I could give it to you. And so that would have solved that problem. But Doughboy still wants to get this football back. I think he felt disrespected. So he goes up to these much older boys and start trying to call beef, trying to get the football back. But then they kick him and they beat him down because these are older kids. And Doughboy, they call him Doughboy because he's a fat kid, and so he's not exactly a beacon of physical strength. So they easily put him down and basically send them on their way. But one of the older boys takes pity on the little kids, and he tosses back the football. But it kind of shows the heart of Doughboy. It's like the odds were overwhelming. So against overwhelming odds, he goes up against these older kids to defend his brother, and I think to defend his honor as well. So he decided that, even though there's a pretty good chance he wasn't going to get the football back, he was going to fight for that football. Later on, the police come and pick up Doughboy and this other kid, Chris, because they have been caught shoplifting. So now they go on to whatever youth detention center. And then that's when the movie ends on the first act, opens up on the second act. So 7 years later, Doughboy gets out of jail and it opens on Doughboy's homecoming. So Doughboy's mother is throwing this huge party. All of their friends come over. And what's interesting is that the main kids, like Doughboy and Ricky, are said to be the same age, and I'm not exactly sure how that's possible. I think there's kind of a mistake in how they are aged, because they can't possibly be the exact same age because they're not twins. They have two different fathers. Like when you look in the credit, well, I didn't look in all of the credits. I looked in the credits provided by IMDb, and then there's other sources like Wikipedia, and both of those sources say that Ricky and Doughboy are age 10. But I can't imagine how that's possible. One of them has got to be older, and one of them has got to be younger. And since Doughboy looks older, I imagine he must be 12, not 10. Or at least 11 and a half. It doesn't make any sense that they're the exact same age and they have the same mother. I'm not buying that. I mean, I have known about instances where women will have like 2 children in almost like 18 months. Maybe that's the situation. It's possible, I think, so that there are certain parts of the year where they're the same age. But if that's true, then that's a nasty woman. She was really getting around. She wasn't even all the way healed before she started having sex again. That's a wild. That's a wild choice. It's not a wise choice, to say the least. Anyway, Doughboy comes home. We see Regina King for the first time. I'm not exactly sure what her relation to the family is. I guess she's Doughboy's girlfriend. They don't do a good job of identifying this particular relationship. It's not a fantastic job because sometimes it seems like that's his sister. Because you don't see like them romancing together. So they could be brother and sister, but it feels weird because is that his sister? I'm not even sure. So anyways, we see Regina King for the first time and she's fantastic. We don't see her in the movie a lot, but her facial expressions are priceless. You also see Ricky grown up. Ricky has a girlfriend, and he and his girlfriend have a baby. So they got to figure out how to take care of this baby. His mother is extremely tolerant of Ricky, his girlfriend, and this baby. I think she's tolerant of it with Ricky in a way that she would not be tolerant of it if it were Doughboy. The pieces of Ricky that you see are him like playing football practice. And then apparently he's a very good football player. So there's a scene where there's a scout that's coming to see about him going to college. This whole scene with the college scout, that's a really nice scene because the college scout comes to Ricky's house and Doughboy and his friends are like out in front of the porch. And, you know, when a scout approaches, one of his friends is asking about getting a scholarship because the guy is coming to approach Ricky about a athletic scholarship. And the dudes on the porch are like, yeah, we could use we like a scholarship. We want to go to college. And if it feels like they're wholly ignorant about the process of getting a scholarship, and like the dude can just give it to him like he's just handing out scholarship. And Doughboy has to basically get them to behave. So, man, shut your dumb ass up. Talk about a scholarship. So his Doughboy's interaction with his crew, it's funny. It's one of the delights of the film. The other slices of life are you see these, I guess they're rival gang members. Like when I watched the movie, I never considered the gangs. Like it didn't seem to be like Ice Cube and his friends, or I should say Doughboy and his friends were in a gang. They just seem to be hanging with each other because they're never throwing up gang signs. They're not wearing gang colors. They're not crip walking. They're not using code or anything like that. They're not doing the type of things that you were engaged in, the behavior that you would associate with a gang, except that they stay together. And then there's a rival group of kids or young men, and they're always riding in the same car. And it's like when they see other kids, like if they see Trey or somebody like that, they're always pointing their gigantic shotgun, scaring people just for the sake of scaring them. So basically just going around terrorizing kids. But I never considered them a rival gang, at least when I was watching it. It just seemed like four kids hanging together and just menacing people. That seems to be their whole thing. It's like they're not fighting over territory. They're not fighting over drugs. They're not trying to rob people. They're just menacing people just for the sake of menacing them. There's the true villains. And when it's like the story really doesn't stop, like the plot really doesn't start until they show up and they start menacing people. But it's kind of like a slow burn, because like during all of these vignettes of life that you see, these slices of life that you see throughout the film, and you see the characters developing, like you see Trey and his new girlfriend. Well, I'm not sure if it's a new girlfriend or old girlfriend, but Trey and his girlfriend Brandy, and Trey, their relationship is that Trey wants to have sex with Brandy. Brandy wants to wait until they're married. Or she wants to wait till later because she doesn't want to get pregnant, and that's her biggest fear. And she's also Catholic, so she doesn't want to violate her religion. And so Trey is pressuring her. And then we see other slices of where Doughboy is hanging out with his friends, and we see slices of them hanging out together and them laughing and joking. Another slice is like, this is one of my favorite parts. Also, one of the most famous parts of the film, and this part is when Furious Styles gives his gentrification speech. So this is when Trey and Ricky, they kind of show up at Furious's place of work. Furious is a financial advisor. He helps people get money for homes. And then he says, y'all want to see something? And I don't think it was Ricky. It was Trey. Like Furious says, y'all want to see something? And Trey asks, do we have a choice? And Furious says no. And he has Trey drive him to a part of that neighborhood where he can show that the houses are kind of run down or whatever. And there's a big billboard. And on the billboard it's talking about, buying money for cash. And that's where Furious gives his gentrification speech, and how corporations or the government, what they do is they try to bring down the property value of the houses, and by introducing a bunch of they systematically introduce elements to keep the neighborhood in a poor condition and driving down the property values. And then when the people who live in that neighborhood start to sell their property, they'll come in and clean up the neighborhood. And by they, I mean like the government and the corporations. They'll start to clean up the neighborhood, and then they'll sell the houses for a greater profit. And that's a simplified version of it. And there's a whole conversation about it. And this is like one of the more overt messages of the movie. Like, it doesn't really have anything to do with the plot, but John Singleton can kind of get away with it because he hasn't really started the plot yet. He's really just showing you slices of people's lives. He's developing their character. And in this moment, he's developing the character of Furious Styles. He's going to show you what his philosophy is and what his standpoints are. You see more of Furious with his son. You see more slices of life of Furious basically telling his son, like, the expectations, like what he expects of his son. You see a slice of Furious asking Trey about his first sexual experience. And it's kind of funny because Trey had not had sex yet, but he doesn't want to tell his father that he hasn't had sex. For some reason, because normally the automatic answer, like if you had not had sex, then you would just tell your parents, especially if your parents are asking, then you would just tell them, no, I had not yet had sex. Or you would lie and say no. Like if you had, you would just lie and say, no, I hadn't had sex. Like, I think most of our parents think that we are virgins until we move out the house, and you just keep up that illusion. But Trey and Furious have a different kind of relationship where I think Furious is open enough where Trey can tell him anything. But for some reason, Trey tells this outlandish story about this sexual encounter that didn't happen. And then later on, Trey is talking to Ricky and he confesses to Ricky that he said he never lied to his father, except for that time where he lied about having sex, which is a weird thing to do. I don't know why you would lie about that. And then Ricky asks, like, well, why haven't you had sex yet? And Ricky said, and I'm sorry, Trey says that it's because he's afraid. He's actually has a lot in common with his girlfriend, Brandy. Like, he's also afraid of being a father. And Ricky is already a father, and that's something he can completely understand. Because at first, Ricky is clowning him for being afraid. And then Ricky says, well, I'm afraid of being a father. And Ricky's like, oh, yeah, that's a big deal, too. And then the other thing is, like, early in the movie, like, there's another conversation about sex, about how you could get AIDS. Like, some dude is bragging about having all this sex. Like, man, you keep messing around, you're going to get that AIDS. And so, obviously, this movie was during the AIDS epidemic. And so some of that messaging was getting through, too. There's a lot of messaging in this film. But like I said, because these are slices of life, he can slide in whatever messages he wants until the plot starts. At this point in time, for the first 2 acts, he's just building character. He's just doing character development. Like, for example, the part where the kids are only 10 years old. This is the part where Trey is only 10 years old, and the burglar breaks in the house, and they're confronted by the cops, and the black cop has a real nasty attitude. And then 7 years later, Trey has an encounter with the same cop, and that cop is like still nasty, still just an evil. It's funny to say this, but he's a racist black cop. And by racist, I mean that he's upholding the system of racism that is being forced upon the people who live in South Central Los Angeles. Like, he is like, the word that we used to use is prejudice. He's prejudiced against young black men. Like, he sees a young black man, he just assumes that they're all in gangs. And he decides that none of them are any good. None of the black men in his neighborhood are going to amount to anything. And he would just as soon as shoot them all. And it has some parallels with the Police and House Party that we just talked about. And it's like a kind of a view of the police. And it's like, this is before that people had started to, like, all of these scandals, before all of these scandals came out. Like, I think the O.J. Simpson scandal was brand new, and you had some other scandals that were talked about but were never caught on video. But now we're seeing a lot more of these incidents with police, or nowadays it's more like government agents getting caught on camera doing horrific things. But back in the day, there were no cameras. There were just rumors and innuendo. There was just like witnesses, and people would say stuff about the police, and then it was basically up to you to decide whether or not you believed it, or there would be movies like this that would kind of show you this, but people would look at this movie and it's like, well, this is fiction. This can't possibly be happening. But these are the lived experiences of people who lived in that area. And absolutely, you had some black cops who were prejudiced against young black men. And to put it lightly, they treated them poorly. There's an incident that kind of starts off the third plot, or the third act of the film, and that's kind of when the plot starts. So basically, Doughboy and his crew, and by extension Trey, like, I guess starting in the second act, you see that there's tensions between like Doughboy and these other dudes that are menacing everybody with their car. They ride around a little red car, and one of them often pulls a gun out, or one time they just pull up in front of Doughboy's house, and Doughboy is like, he stands up and is like, what? And then they drive off. So there's a lot of that going on. And it seems like one of them inside the car is always armed. And there's an incident where everybody's hanging out, and it's just a spot. It's a spot where I guess they're in some commercial district, and they're just hanging out, just talking and having fun. And then these dudes come by and they bump into Ricky, and Ricky almost gets into a fight off of this dude bumping into him. And then Doyle walks in front, and he pulls up his shirt, and he has his pistol tucked in there, and he's like, "What? What?" And so the dudes that bumped into Ricky, they kind of back off and they walk away. And so everybody's still having fun, and all of a sudden, it's like, somebody with a machine gun just shooting it off in the air. But see, they don't know. All they hear is machine gun. Everybody at this gathering just starts to scatter. They get into their cars. You got Doughboy and this girl, they jump into the car. Ricky is trying to get into the car and is unable to get in the car, and he's like, Doughboy just drives off, and Ricky has to like crawl and roll away somehow, but he gets away. He gets into Trey's car, and Trey drive, and he and Trey they drive off. They driving away from the area, and like I said, the dudes, they just shooting their guns in the air because they enjoy terrorizing people. While Trey is driving Ricky home, they get stopped, pulled over by the police. And when they get pulled over, it's the same racist cop that he met when he was 10 years old, that Trey met when Trey was 10 years old. I am not certain that he remembers this cop. When he saw this cop, it was dark outside. And at the same time, he really wasn't talking to the cop. It was his father talking to the cop. And then at some point, his father told Trey to get into the house. So I don't even know if he remembers this cop, but it's the same cop. And the cop tells him to get out of the car. He puts a gun right in Ricky's face. Like, both of them get out of the car. There's one white cop who's basically covering Ricky, and then the black cop is covering Trey. And he takes out his police revolver and he shoves it in Trey's face, talking about, what gang you with? You with this gang? You with that gang? He starts naming all of these gangs and talking about how he should blow them away and nobody will ever know about it. And Trey is terrified, obviously, because there's a gun in his face and there's a crazy cop holding it. And he does his Denzel Washington tear, and one tear coming down his eyes. And then I think after the cop is satisfied that he has terrified Trey, no, it's not that. They get a call, and apparently it's a more serious matter. So they let Trey and Ricky go to deal with the more serious matter, probably the machine gun fire that was heard earlier. So the police let them go, and Trey drives Ricky home. And then when he gets over to Brandy's house, he's a mess. He's shaking, he's furious, he's angry, he feels powerless. And this is also one of my favorite parts, the most impactful part. Because for the first time, because like before when he's talking to Brandy, he's just talking to her in a sense of, I think he sees her as a friend, but also sees her just as a sexual object. But I think in this moment, he comes to her and he's his most vulnerable. And I think for the first time, he sees her as a friend, as more of just an object to have sex with, but also somebody who he can confide in. And he talks about, he's having a confession to her about how powerless he feels, and about how everybody's coming against him, because he had to deal with these gangs, and then he had to deal with this police harassing him. And there was nothing he can do about either of those situations. He's just utterly powerless. And his fate is like a toss-up. At any point, he could have been killed. And he's lucky to survive. Like, he's doing all the right things. He's following his father's wisdom. But in spite of And he's not involved in gangs or drugs. At best, you could say that he's friends with somebody who might be in a gang, but he's not in gang activity. He's not robbing. He's not slinging drugs. He's not doing anything that gangs do. He's just hanging out with his friends, and he's doing he's good at school. He's doing all of the things that one might need to do in order to succeed. And yet he's put in a position where he's utterly vulnerable, and it feels like everything's coming apart, and he's swinging his fists at an invisible and unbeatable opponent, like while he's in Brandy's house, and he starts to weep and he starts to cry, and he's like he's so tired. He's so tired of the things that's going on. And at that moment, you feel for him. It's like the emotional despair transfers from screen to myself in such a fluid manner. Because Trey was vulnerable with Brandy, and Brandy, I guess she felt safe with him at that moment, I think. And then Brandy decides to give him some. I don't know if it's for pity or because maybe it's because, like I said earlier, that she felt safe, or maybe she felt more deeper in love with him, or maybe it's because she wanted him to feel better, because not everything has to be bad. There are some good things in life. So she decides that they could share a good thing. But is at this moment that whatever defenses Brandy had against having sex, she tore them down, and they had sex that night. There's another great scene in this film, another one of our favorite parts, and this is where Furious and his ex Reva, they talk about their son Trey, and Reva really wants Trey to come over and basically come back to live with her. It's kind of wild because, like, Trey is almost grown now. He's about ready to go to college. But that was kind of the vision that she had. She had a vision of him staying with his father for just a few years. And then after she finished school and she's a little bit more successful and she lives in a bigger house, then that Trey could come back. But Trey is not exactly ready to come back, although they don't have a conversation with him about it. It's just the parents talking to each other. But it don't really seem like Trey is ready to go back to his mother's house. It's like like I say, he's about to graduate high school. In this conversation, Furious tells her that, it's too late. He's fully grown now. His childhood is over. You missed it. And for whatever reason, he's admonishing her for sending Trey gifts because Trey has a job and he doesn't need any gifts from his mother. I guess because he feels like she's babying him and he's not a baby anymore. And then after he makes this proclamation, he's about to get up. They're at a nice restaurant, and he's about to get up and talk about go smoke a cigarette or whatever. And she tells him to sit down. She says, sit down, or I'll start screaming, and then the both of us will be embarrassed. And so he sits down because Reva is a strong woman. And the thing about, I don't know if this is overt, but it seems to me from my reading of Furious that he's not exactly comfortable with strong women. I think that's the reason why he and Reva are not together, because Reva is a very strong and intelligent woman, and it's not something that I think Furious can exactly deal with. He's a strong and stubborn and proud man, and I think when he's with a strong woman, it kind of conflicts with him. You don't actually see examples of him being with other women, so I don't know for sure. I don't know what his type is, but it's clear that he and Reva, even though they're cordial, they can't stay together romantically. It's not something that, I don't feel like it's something that Furious can take. There's a woman that kind of likes him. I think that's Doughboy's mother. And there's one time when there's a cookout. Trey fixes a plate for his father, brings the food over to Furious at their house. And Furious talk about, oh yeah, she cooked this. It's still good. Yeah, she's still good at cooking. And I think Trey had talked about how she asked about him. And Furious said, well, she might have had a chance. She talked too damn much. But I'm not sure if Brenda is a particularly strong woman. She doesn't strike me as such. So I don't think that Furious would be threatened by her. But that he didn't like her because she talked too much. I don't know. It's a sign. It's a sign of something. So the basic plot of the third act, it's really the only plot of the movie because, like I said, the rest of the movie are just slices of life. They're just vignettes, just like pieces of story. But then the real story takes place basically it's the two rival gangs. It's like Doughboy's gang and this unnamed gang. It's like we don't know the members, their names. We just know their faces and how they're menacing. So now these dudes, they decide that they're going to make a move. So Ricky's in the house. His girlfriend comes in. She's trying to make something. She needs some extra ingredients, cornmeal. So she sends Ricky to the store to get some cornmeal. So Ricky and Trey, they go to the store, they get some cornmeal, and then on their way out, they run into those dudes, the same thugs that have been menacing him since the second act. And so when they see each other, Trey and Ricky, they run for it. They're on foot. They start running through like the alleys and whatnot, and they're being chased by these dudes in the car. And the basic plot is this rival gang versus Doughboy's gang, or Doughboy and his friends, because like I said, Ricky's not in the gang. Trey's not in the gang. Ricky's trying to get this scholarship. At one point, he's thinking about like joining the military because he was told he had to, in order to get this sports scholarship, he would have to get at least a 700 on his SATs. And he's not confident that he's going to break 700. He was struggling at the SATs. The gang life is not his path. And then Trey, at the same time, he has aspiration of going to college. But they're still harassed by these thugs, I guess. They start running from these dudes. These dudes start chasing them around. And then at some point, they kind of lose these dudes. And Ricky wants to split up. So Ricky says, you go this way, you go that way. They're not going to be able to find us. We'll be all right. And Trey doesn't want to do it, but he's like, all right, we'll do it that way. So they start going back to Ricky's house. They're taking different paths. Then the gang is driving around in the car, and they're able to spot Ricky when he's almost home. Because Ricky had basically stopped being concerned about them. He thinks that he lost them. So he's actually just scratching lottery tickets at this point and walking home. He's not being alert. And then at the same time that the gang sees Ricky, Trey sees Ricky. And this is one of the most impactful part of the films. It's everybody's favorite part. This is the part where, in slow motion, when Trey sees Ricky and beyond Ricky he sees the gang, and he screams Ricky's name. It's like, Ricky! Ricky looks up. He turns around. He sees the gang. He starts running in the opposite direction, but he's running in a straight line. And the dude that hangs out in the backseat, he's the one with the giant shotgun. And he just blasts Ricky in the back. Just blam, blam, and then they drive off. Trey runs over to Ricky as he's dying. Doughboy, since they're close to Ricky's house, Doughboy notices that the car drives off. He goes over to chase the car, and then he sees where Ricky and Trey are, goes over. It's a horrifying moment. It's an incredibly tragic moment. They bring Ricky over back to Doughboy's house, and then Doughboy gets his mother, and then his mother is like, basically everybody loses it. Like, Ricky's girlfriend comes out first and she starts screaming, and then their mother comes out and she starts screaming at Doughboy because she thinks Doughboy did something. At first she goes over to Ricky to try to revive Ricky, but at this point he's already dead. And so when she accepts that Ricky's dead, because she didn't accept it for a while, she blames Doughboy, like, what did you do? What did you do? And he's trying to defend himself. I ain't do nothing. But she's not in her right mind at this moment. And she's almost attacking Ricky, and they have to she's almost attacking Doughboy, and they're pulling her off of Doughboy. And they're crying in the heat. And then, like, Doughboy has to get out the house because his mother is so upset. But then he's upset too. At the same time, when the situation settles down just a little bit, Trey, he starts to go to his house, and he tells Doughboy to meet him later on tonight. So he wants to get revenge. Like, this is for the first time. He wants to engage in gang violence. When he goes home, I think he gets his father's gun, starts to load it. The father finds out about what happened because Brandy she kind of finds out what happened. And then she's trying to chase after Trey, but Trey he's not in the frame of mind to talk to Brandy. And so she's hysterical. She's telling Furious that something must have happened to Rick. So Furious goes over. He sees what Trey is doing. And, like, another incredibly impactful moment is when Furious is telling Trey to give him the gun, to give up the gun, because going out and seeking revenge is not going to solve the problem. And he's kind of cold-blooded with it. He's like, what's happened with Doughboy and his family, it's a bad problem, but it is their problem. It's not your problem. And this is hard for Trey to accept, but he gives up the gun and apparently goes to his room. Later on, I think his girlfriend comes back, and his girlfriend and Furious go to his room, and they see that he had jumped out the window and ran to the car where Doughboy was waiting. Doughboy got his whole crew, and now they're cruising around looking for the gangsters that killed Ricky. At some point during the night, Trey tells Doughboy to let him out the car. He changed his mind. I don't think he ever stopped thinking about what his father said to him. Furious is at home. He has these exercise metal balls that you hold in your hand, and I think they're like meditation balls, and he's just worried about his son now. He is working these meditation balls in his hand, wondering if he's ever going to see his son again, wondering if anything he said got through to his son. But then we see his son, and he has to get out of the car. So something actually got through. The funny thing is that he's not really out of danger. Now he's just on the street, walking home alone. This is just like an easy target for these gangsters. But I think at that moment he felt like he needed to heed his father. So he got out the car. And then Doughboy and the gang, they start driving around looking for these dudes. And they can't find him. So it's like, well, let's go stop, get something to eat. It's like very late at night. So there are very few places they can go. So they go to the spot that they know. And as it would happen, they weren't the only ones hungry. The rival gang members were also hungry. And they stopped at that place that Doughboy and his crew were going to. And they see him. And just as they pull up, the rival gang, they see Doughboys and the car. And then they get up, they start running away. But they running in a straight line. And there's really nothing they can run to. I don't even know how they got to the restaurant. Where's their car? Because they've been riding around the car the entire time. Don't know. Anyway, they start running away in a straight line. And Doughboy and his friends, they just start firing. And they got all three of them. And then this is supposed to be a drive-by. But Doughboy is in a state. So he's not in his right mind at this moment. So he gets out of the car and he walks over to the ones that are still living. And he basically he shoots them to make sure that they're dead. He doesn't want them to be paraplegic. He kills them. You know, and while he's walking over to finish the job off, his friends are like, get back in the car, the police come in. Because it's supposed to be a drive-by. You're not supposed to get out the car and finish the job on a drive-by. You're supposed to just shoot and drive away. But Doughboy ain't in his right mind. So after he finishes them off, he gets back in the car. And they drive off. So the next day, Doughboy has a heart-to-heart with Trey. And then we later learn that Doughboy is murdered 2 weeks later. But at the same time, Trey and Brandy managed to make it to college. So it's kind of a bittersweet situation. And one of the messages I think of the film was that, and this is clearly a message, more of a message than a theme, and I mentioned it earlier, is that if you avoid the drugs and the gang violence, then you could theoretically, come up out of your circumstances. You could go to college, move to a better neighborhood, live in peace. But there are several points in the movie where Trey's life could have ended, like, quickly. Like, he's doing all the things that his father had taught him. And yet, he could have died at any time. So it's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee to get out of the hood, but you have to, I think the message is you have to follow a path that gives you the best chance of getting out of a bad situation. So that is the glory and the tragedy of Boyz n the Hood. It's one of the most impactful movies that I watched when I was much younger. I was just I had already graduated high school. I was in Prince George's Community College when I watched this, and it had an incredible effect on my life. It was just an experience to watch this movie. And I got to know, how did you enjoy this movie? Did it have an impact on your life? Was it positive or negative? Let me know. Did I catch all of your favorite parts? Did I miss some? If you have any comments on what parts that I missed that you really enjoyed, let me know. Leave a comment on one of my socials or write me an email at friends@backlookcinema.com. And we're going to keep this show right along moving. We're going to talk about the top 10 trivia. Trivia top 10, as usual, comes from IMDb. And we'll start with this one. To maintain a sense of realism, writer-director John Singleton never warned the actors and actresses about when shots would be fired. Their reactions were real. So that's interesting. What's even more interesting is that they're in a real South Central neighborhood. So the actors don't know the shots aren't real. And I'm guessing the neighbors that live in that area don't know the shots aren't real. So that's pretty wild. Ice Cube was John Singleton's first choice for Doughboy. He approached him at a rock music concert a couple of times, and Cube was reluctant, but Singleton eventually convinced Cube to audition via a screen test. Singleton later encouraged Cube to write screenplays based on Cube's contribution to rap lyrics, which resulted in the successful Friday film franchise. Columbia Pictures wanted to make this movie, but wanted someone other than John Singleton to direct it. Singleton believed only he could do it, replying, "Hell no, I'm not going to let somebody from Idaho or Enrico direct a movie about living in South Central Los Angeles. They can't come in here and cast it and go through the rewrites and know exactly what aesthetic are unique to this film." And I have to agree with him. Reggie Green, who played Chris as an adult, is a paraplegic in real life. His paralysis, like his characters, was the result of gun violence. He was hit by a stray bullet at the age of 6, which is horrible. John Singleton's Oscar nomination for Best Director at age of 24 made him the youngest director to ever receive such an accolade, beating Orson Welles by a good 2 years. I'm not exactly sure if this record still stands. I haven't checked. I don't know if there's been a younger director that's been nominated for Best Director, but that's an interesting little factoid. He was really young. In an October 20th, 2014 Nerdist podcast, Paul Reubens revealed that John Singleton was security for the set of Pee-wee's Playhouse. John Singleton presented his script to Laurence Fishburne and Reubens and asked for their opinions. This led to Fishburne being cast in this movie. And if you don't remember, Pee-wee's Playhouse was a children's show, and Laurence Fishburne was one of the actors that would appear on the show. He was Cowboy something. Cowboy Bob? I can't remember. He was a cowboy with a jerry curl. Fishburne, who plays Cuba Gooding Jr.'s character's father, is less than 6.5 years older than him in real life. So, yeah, I didn't catch on. Actually, I just thought that he was just kind of a youngish looking father. And Cuba was like an oldish looking teenager. John Singleton originally wanted the members of NWA as part of Ice Cube's entourage in this movie, but Cube's departure from NWA over a salary dispute resulted in a feud as depicted in Ice Cube's Death Certificate album, NWA's 100 Miles and Runnin', and the final NWA album, El Feel for Zaggin'. This forced Singleton to recast the roles of Cube's entourage. Also, in the infamous chain snatcher scene, the thief who was subsequently beaten wears an Eazy-E t-shirt. So, I guess another message? Doughboy and his crew were based on the Rollin' 60s Crips street gang, while Ferris and his crew were based on the Crenshaw Mafia Bloods street gang. So, the two groups of people, the two crews, you had Doughboy's crew and you had this other crew run by Ferris. They're supposed to be gangs, but like I said, they didn't do anything that was overtly gang-like. Ricky, played by Morris Chestnut, almost got run over by Doughboy's Chevy Impala during the scene where Ferris shoots his Mac 11 in the air. You can see Chestnut running to Trey's car and slipping and sliding on the street. Luckily, he managed to crawl away in time, and John Singleton used the take due to its authenticity, as directors often do. So I hope that I brought some knowledge to you from this trivia? Was there anything that I had mentioned that you didn't know about? There was so much that I had not realized from reading the trivia. Let me know. Give me a heads up. And now that we finished with the trivia, let's talk about what the critics thought. The critics have it at 96%. On the audience popcorn meter, it's at 93%. On Rotten Tomatoes, and on IMDb reviews, it's at 7.8 out of 10. So relatively high scores, much higher than I anticipated. Steve Murray from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution wrote, a smart mix of character study, messy film, and action thriller. It's a cut far above other recent gang flicks. And this was a contemporary review, so yeah, that would make sense. Brian Orndorff from BrianOrndorff.com wrote, a coming-of-age story without fluidity, hopping from scene to scene, often indiscriminately. Singleton has stamina but lacks connective tissue, messing up development and motivation, unable to juggle the three distinct perspectives. I don't think that this is accurate. I think you can pretty much follow the character lines from the main characters, from the ones that you're supposed to be paying attention to. Like you're supposed to be paying attention to Furious, Doughboy, Ricky, and those lines are clearly drawn. Those characters are clearly developed. Some of the less developed characters might be Brandy and some of Doughboy's crew. You don't get like a full sense of who they are, but the movie is kind of focusing on them as a group and not necessarily as individuals. Jeff Andrew from Time Out wrote, what makes the film so affecting is the no-nonsense direction and Singleton's sure, specific sense of the rewards and hardships of community. In this, he has lent excellent support from a fine cast. Yeah, I tend to agree. At last we have David Kerr from Chicago Tribune, who wrote, Boyz n the Hood wants to be the learning tree and Superfly at once, an ambition that doesn't seem quite honest. And I don't really know what he's trying to say, because this film is based on John Singleton's life. He's writing his lived experiences. So I don't see how it's trying to be these two other films. But I hadn't seen these two other films, so perhaps I'm judging his criticism unfairly. But I wouldn't say that it's dishonest, because the movie is being written from a lived experience. Finally, Boyz n the Hood is, as of this recording, available for purchase wherever you get your digital or physical media. As you might imagine, Boyz n the Hood is a particularly heavy movie. I need a palate cleanser. I need to shift to lighter fare. Next time, we'll check out Martin Laurence in Big Mama's House. You can follow us on Blue Sky, Threads, TikTok, Instagram, and sometimes Twitter at Backlit Cinema. Please contact us with any questions, comments, or suggestions at friends@backlitcinema.com. Please rate and review on your favorite podcast app, and if you're listening on YouTube, please like or subscribe or leave a comment below. I'd love to hear from you. One last time, if you like the show, then please help us grow by spreading the word about Backlit Cinema, the podcast. Believe me, it matters. I've been Zoe Richardson. Be safe, share a movie from yesteryear with your family, hug your loved ones, and if you're going to be anything, be outstanding.